All right. Welcome, everyone. My name is Dina Pradel with String Automotive, and I'll be your moderator for today's webinar, Think Like a Network, Know Your Market, and Delight Your Audience Through Data. Our presenter today will be Ken Kaloji. He's the founder and CEO of String Automotive. Our newest product is the Dealer Positioning System, a business intelligence platform designed to help dealers make more confident and profitable decisions through data. Ken is a bona fide data geek. I think you'll really enjoy his presentation today. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get going. The presentation will last about 30 minutes, and then we'll have a Q&A period afterward. If you have any questions or issues during the webinar, feel free to shoot us a question and we'll get right back to you. And at the end of the webinar, we will select one of the attendees to receive a consulting session with our Director of Analytics. He'll be able to take a look at some of the competitive data from your market, as well as your own web stats, and hopefully be able to give you some great competitive nuggets of information around your market and some potential ideas of how you could be attacking that market and where the opportunity might lie. So after the email, we will send out a link to the recording and also the name of the winner of that consultation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to our presenter, Ken Kaloji.
Thanks, Dina, and thanks everybody for joining us on the webinar. Good morning or afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. I'll show my screen now. Let's see if we can get this going. Should be able to see the presentation. Okay, so as Dina mentioned, founder and CEO of String Automotive Solutions, and the presentation today is Think Like a Network, Know Your Market, and Delay Your Audience Through Data. You can see that the sort of the big red title, if you will, is What's Your Nielsen Rating? And that's really a nod to us taking the theme of effectively a TV network. And we think it's a good, accessible analogy. It's actually proposed by Joe Webb, a consultant that many of you might know, a few months back when we were generating ideas for this presentation, actually. So we thought it worked great. We as a company try to make data very accessible. And so if we can use an analogy that other people will, will also sort of hook onto and make concepts that could be difficult easier to digest, then we certainly think that's a step in the right direction. So we're going to talk a good deal about demographics and psychographics, really knowing your customer and how that information can be applied to strategies that you might be undertaking, on a daily, weekly, monthly, or even quarterly basis. Really understanding your customer, knowing what makes him or her tick, and of course, armed with that information, being able to segment properly and turn those insights into dollars. And so again, we're going to wrap it all around the theme of Nielsen ratings and TV networks and that sort of thing. So a few intro slides, and then we have four major sections. Each one is framed with a question. It's not a question that I'll be asking you guys. It's more of just, again, a framing question to help wrap the concepts around. So let's dive in. So as we all know, and we're all marginally familiar or potentially very familiar with the concept of a Nielsen rating and TV networks using those ratings, those benchmarks to measure their audience, right? Market share, for example, a concept we're all very familiar with. How many viewers, in the case of a network, tuned into a particular program, to evaluate the success of a particular program, right? Whether or not it's going to be renewed for another season or not canceled during the first season, what makes it successful. And ultimately, because most TV shows are not just, especially the successful ones, they're not just sort of pulled out of thin air. They're usually built with a very specific formula in mind. How networks can use Nielsen ratings to improve the performance of shows. And again, same concept here in the auto industry, how we can, as dealers, measure our audience, evaluate our success, and ultimately, because I don't think there's anybody on this webinar who's satisfied, even if things are going well, they could always be better, right? I mean, that's sort of who we are as a group of people, as it were. And so, it's important for a network, just like a car dealer, to continually benchmark and improve performance. So ultimately, the questions haven't changed as to what makes a successful show or business, but the way in which success is measured has changed dramatically. And taking a quick look here at the the difference in complexity from late 70s, for example, where you had about 70 million households in the U.S. with TVs. Nielsen only had to sample 1,200 out of 70 million households to get a pretty accurate estimate of what viewership was like in a given market, what market share was, et cetera, et cetera. And I mean, that represents about 0.002% of the total population. So things were a little bit simpler. TV really was the only game in town. And, and so they needed frankly, a surprisingly small sample size to be able to generate good insights for networks around programming and viewership. So fast forward to today, these numbers were taken from last year. Of course, the number of ways we can consume programming has increased dramatically. Yes, there's still TV, of course, but now there's DVR, there's on demand, of course. We've got web-based programming, YouTube, for example. We have web-connected TVs that aren't even connected to cable box anymore, mobile devices, et cetera, et cetera. So things have gotten much more complicated. And even though the population, people with TVs, hasn't increased dramatically, you'll notice that the number of households that Nielsen is sampling has increased by, dramatically. And so in terms of a percentage of the total number of households that Nielsen is sampling, it's actually gone up by 10 times, which is, again, pretty significant. So ultimately, Nielsen has responded to the changing complexity of the world by increasing the sophistication of their measurements. And we're going to get into that, see some of the ways that they've increased their sophistication, their measurements in a second, a few slides. But the parallel here is that I think we all can relate to this in the sense that, it used to be, from an advertising and marketing perspective, right? You had traditional media. Maybe you didn't know how effective it was, but or precisely, I should say. But there weren't a lot of games in town, right? It was pretty straightforward process to advertise and to attract shoppers in. Now, of course, with the rise of the internet, the rise of smartphones, the rise of all sorts of different data sources. Again, as we'll see in a little bit, the way I look at it, the power has really shifted. It used to be more in control of the advertisers, the dealers, the networks. Now it's much more on the consumer's terms. And so ultimately, in order to track that and to make actionable decisions that are going to improve the top and bottom line of our businesses, we need better tools and better data sets to know who our customers are, what they're responding to, again, as I mentioned earlier, what makes them tick, and ultimately where they are, so we can make really informed decisions about where to point the guns from an advertising perspective. And even, thinking a little bit operationally, in this industry, certainly thinking, about which stocking decisions we want to make from an inventory perspective, and ultimately getting into fixed ops. I mean, there's so many key decisions that need to be made with better data and better tool sets. And ultimately, if we have that, we can measure the audience, evaluate our success, and continually improve our performance. So the first question of our sort of four major topics, major framing questions is, what's your prime time? So we're going to talk about how things have shifted dramatically in an internet-fueled world. And so once upon a time, as we all remember, when a TV show was broadcast, if you wanted to catch it, you had to be in the right place at the right time. There was no way to easily record it or on-demand it or catch it on your smartphone or what have you. So things, again, were a little bit simpler. And broadcasters, of course, realized a little while ago that things were shifting fairly quickly. So it wasn't just about who was plunked down in front of the TV at the right time when a broadcast went out, a broadcast aired. And we, of course, know the exact same thing about our customers. Again, the power has shifted. Shoppers don't shop in the same ways that they did before because they have many more data sources and tools at their disposal. And by tools, I mean not just again, data sets, but also devices, media sources, et cetera, et cetera. So things have become much more complicated. And so Nielsen, again, looking at the way the networks approach this, Nielsen being the lifeblood of TV network metrics, they actually started looking at Live Plus 3 and Live Plus 7 metrics. So in other words, if you are recording or on-demanding a show, the live date is, of course, the original broadcast date of the show, and then Live Plus 3 would be the live date plus 3 days out, how many people watched the recording or on demand of the show on their DVR, because of course, much like the NSA, everybody is watching everything we do. So when you record something or on demand something, that is all being tracked and then fed back ultimately to somebody like Nielsen. So Live plus 7, of course, would be the same thing, plus 7 days. Twitter, we'll see in a little bit that Nielsen actually started tracking Twitter, which I think is obviously a necessity, but still crazy to think about. Mobile device usage, web link TVs, it goes on and on. So things are complicated, but Nielsen has begun tracking that data in stages to feed that back to the network to give a more holistic picture of what's going on. And we pose sort of the bit of a rhetorical question here. How are you responding, right? Because again, as the world has shifted in complexity, we're certainly not immune to the changing research paths or buying process that the consumers are now taking. And we use the analogy here of effectively, dealers need their own Nielsen ratings to help get better intel and to help make better decisions. So baseline for digital, of course, is Google Analytics. You've got social media metrics, information around market share from Pulp, for example, or Experian, demographic data, psychographic data, I should say, demand data from Dadium in terms of inventory searches. I mean, there are so many different data sets. Of course, the trick can be putting them all together, not just getting them, but putting them all together in a way that makes sense. So this is a neat little graphic that we made up. This was actually about a year ago, and I'll explain why the time frame is significant. So I would say, maybe 12, 14 months ago, we took a snapshot of a dealer's web data, the top time series, all the peaks and valleys. It looks like almost an EKG meter or something. That's the hour-by-hour web traffic, day by day, to this particular website. So it doesn't tell you a lot. I mean, you can certainly see daily, daily and hourly patterns, but it's not going to give you a lot of insight. So we decided to plot it a little bit differently. We heat mapped it by day of week and hour of day, and you can see for those who can see the colors, anything in the blues or purples, those are the cooler hours, meaning less traffic, fewer visitors came to the dealer's site. Anything in yellow or especially red or orange, those are the hottest periods of activity. And this is actually looking only at desktop traffic. So you can see that desktop visitors between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m., 6 p.m., Monday through Friday, were the heaviest accessors or visitors to this dealer's website. And the more sites we looked at, the more we found the pattern held. There's a little bit of activity Saturday morning and a little bit on Sunday around noon, but effectively the biggest usage by desktop shoppers, car shoppers using desktops, was again during the work week when they're at work, surprisingly, hence the desktop. And what we found at the time, again, this is where the timing is somewhat significant. What we found at the time is that mobile shoppers had the exact opposite behavior, meaning if they were on a mobile device, they were using their mobile devices most frequently to go to dealer sites nights and weekends. So the exact opposite, i.e., great, I'm out of work now, maybe I'm at home watching TV, I'm on my iPad, my iPhone, what have you, or, of course, the weekend, I'm out and about, whatever. They would pull out their mobile devices and use them to look at, to shop for cars. Now, fast forward to last month when we refreshed all this data, what we found is that while the desktop activity hasn't changed, mobile activity is completely different. The prime time now for mobile is actually 24/7. There really are no significant usage patterns in terms of mobile being only nights and weekends. Now mobile is all the time. So speaking of how prime time has shifted, we used to have a sort of security blanket of we know what we know. The world is a familiar place. It's the old sort of the old conventional wisdom that holds. But what we found, what the data leads us to believe, is that is no longer the case. It might be for desktop traffic, but with the dramatic increase in mobile traffic, and not just the number of people using mobile devices, but how and when they're using mobile devices, the very notion of prime time is almost obsolete, because prime time is all the time now. So significant in terms of making digital advertising decisions or even traditional advertising decisions, for your dealership, in terms of fishing where the proverbial fish are. So let's move on to discussion a little bit about demographics and touch on psychographics as well with a section called Who's Your Demographic? So quick note on demographics and psychographics for those who may not be wholly familiar with the concepts. A demographic is simply a way of categorizing a person or a group of people in terms of a, shall we say, an empirical, meaning a way that can be well defined by a number or by some sort of a category. So that way it makes it easier to aggregate data, to slice and dice data, to analyze, who people are. And it could be looking at people by zip code, could be looking at people by income, could be looking at people by education level, anything like that. That would be a demographic attribute. And a psychographic attribute is similar. It's a defined way of looking at somebody or some group of people, but it's more around what makes them tick, right? So maybe somebody is, household in a certain zip code is earning, X thousands of dollars a year. That would be more of a demographic data point. Psychographic would be more around, how do they like their advertising, their messaging? What do they respond to? All that kind of stuff. So it's a pretty powerful combination when you look at the two. So moving on to a slide here, we've got Walking Dead. I'll talk about that in a quick second here. So to a TV network, really everything is all about selling advertising because that's how they generate their revenue. Ultimately, to sell advertising, of course, they need viewers, they need eyeballs on their on their programming. In order to get viewers, you need programming that speaks to a particular audience. Otherwise, nobody's going to watch a particular show. And of course, speaking to a particular audience and getting them to watch a show requires knowing the audience, knowing what makes them tick, right? So now you can see how this is sort of wrapping up for rolling up, I should say, relevant to a network. And so a good example here between Walking Dead and Hyundai, as you can see in the images up here. So The Walking Dead, AMC said, hey, we've got this show. It seems like it'll cater really well to Generation Y males, so Gen Y males, very specific demographic. There are a lot of them, but it's still a very specific demographic when you look at the entire population. And so they said, okay, well, let's start shopping around sponsorships. And Hyundai said, geez, hey, we've actually, we've got a model that could fit this. We want to target toward Gen Y males, so it was a match made in heaven. And of course, you look at the picture here, you can notice there's bodies strewn all over the place, smashed up cars. Yet, of course, the Hyundai is virtually pristine, and it's the latest model. So the sort of, again, tongue-in-cheek lesson here is that Hyundai dealers will probably survive the apocalypse. But the point is, AMC had a program that targeted a specific demographic. Hyundai had a product that targeted a specific demographic as well, and they just happened to match up, and it ended up actually being a very successful advertising strategy because The Walking Dead, of course, ended up catering to more than just Gen Y males, broader audience, so that got Hyundai more exposure. It was a win-win. So demographics do matter, and psychographics do matter, even if it just comes down to something as sort of basic, if you will, as dollars and cents, right, if you're a network. And as we'll see in a second, our argument is that the exact same rules apply to a dealership, i.e. demographics and psychographics matter when it comes to dollars and cents. And so, this is sort of recapping here. Networks often try to target a specific demographic with programming tailored to them, right? Targeting helps sell advertising, everybody wins. And so the idea is, you could be watching a show, you might think, wow, this show is horrendous. Now, it could be that, yes, the show actually is horrendous, or it could be that you're really not in the target demographic, but other people might think the show is fantastic. And, we have an example here of NCIS. I'm sure we can think of a million examples of how there's a show that really speaks to a particular set of people. And we have one example in a couple of slides, but and you look at NCIS, and that's a show that didn't actually have a lot of success at first, the first few years it was on, but then as soon as it hit syndication, it exposed the show to a broader audience. And then those people who were watching the reruns started tuning in live. So then the show exploded. And this is a show that really appeals to everybody. Number 2 show on TV, looking at the Live +7 ratings, 35 million weekly viewers, amazing licensing agreements, et cetera, and their formula, so to speak, when it comes to, again, knowing their audience. You've got a boyishly appealing star, Mark Harmon. You've got short dialogue, crimes on the lighter side. We're not, not trying to really offend anybody. Safe humor. It's sort of catering to everybody. And episodes that are self-contained, right? So they're good for syndication. You don't have a 3 or 5 or season-long arc that you need to watch in order. And so, our contention is that trying to appeal to the masses is probably not the best approach unless you happen to really own a market or have a huge share of a given market across multiple brands and a lot of sort of penetration on the ground. The reason why is because it's very difficult, it's very expensive, it's costly to try to appeal to everybody. I mean, you think about if any of you have ever read Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore, a little business strategy. The idea is that especially if you're trying to launch a new product, for example, or penetrate a new market, or even an established market with trying to unseat an incumbent, the last thing you want to do is try to, shotgun approach things. You really need to take a more focused approach, pick, one particular segment that you want to target and laser focus on that. So, our opinion is that it's usually more effective to take that targeted approach, which is more cost effective, which is good, and it's also easier to craft a strategy around that. And so this is a tale of 2 zip codes looking at demographics and psychographics, 2 zip codes in the Boston area. One of them is a little more patriotic than the other. It's 01776. It's actually Sudbury, Massachusetts. There is a BMW dealership smack dab in the middle of that zip code. Then there's another one that's about 20 miles away, 02062, where there is another competitive BMW dealership smack dab in the middle of that zip code. So when looking at the household by household data from a demographic and psychographic perspective of new BMW owners, you can see that, looking at the high level demographics, average income is pretty consistent, right, between the 2 zip codes. Their preferred channel in terms of how to get a direct message to them is actually email, 3-to-1 versus direct mail. So commonality there, and nobody ever seems to like telemarketers. In terms of the media or medium, I should say, in this particular case that is preferred, this is where the discrepancies really take hold. So the 01776 zip code is more in tune. We looking at them sort of from a broad perspective, we consider them more. Again, this is perhaps a bit of a misleading categorization, but we wanted to internally here, we wanted to sort of pick a comparison. So we look at it as old money versus new money. So you look at 01776, their preferred medium is actually newspaper, which almost seems impossible in this day and age, but it's an older demographic. Not that they don't respond to others, but their preferred medium is newspaper, versus the quote unquote newer money in 02062, which responds to traditional media, but also is more digitally savvy. And then this is where things get really interesting. It's the idea of how do you message these people? What sort of a carrot do you dangle in front of them to get them to respond well to your messaging, your advertising, your dealership? Well, 01776 Sudbury, they really like the sort of old school qualities, right? Brand strength, customer service, relationships, all of that, again, the stuff that takes a while to cultivate, but once you have it in place, man, these people are probably going to be loyal forever. But then 02062, again, they respond to that, but they really respond well to incentives and endorsements from, people that they would recognize. And so, again, a tale of 2 zip codes, I said a few minutes ago, because, you're looking at zip codes that are 20 miles apart, same category of people, new BMW purchasers, people who bought new BMWs, in the recent past. And on the surface, they seem very much the same. So you think, okay, great, I can just, shotgun approach the same strategy, but, across an entire market. But if you really want to pinpoint things and really want to speak to the people in those particular zip codes, almost at a household by household level, you need to peel back the onion further and find that quote unquote programming that speaks to your audience, as it were. So ultimately, relevant messaging means more relevant and engaged customers. So sales cycle shortened, gross probably goes up, et cetera, et cetera. So next section is what's your media mix? All right, and so you can see a lot of logos up here. So we're going to talk a little bit about peeking behind the scenes a little bit. Again, peeling back the onion, not always going by conventional wisdom. And so we'll start this little section by saying that numbers, in this case Nielsen ratings, really only tell part of the story. So I'm sure everybody has, again, a million different examples of shows that were canceled. Maybe you liked the show and you were sad when it was canceled, you're pissed off. Maybe they brought it back, maybe they didn't, but networks, of course, have various targets, ratings targets that they have for a show, and if the show is not meeting those ratings targets, then the show is in danger of being canceled. So we have a few examples over here: Star Trek, original series, Arrested Development, Family Guy, Futurama. These were all shows that were canceled and then brought back by popular demand. In the case of Star Trek, it was a letter writing campaign. In the case of Arrested Development, Family Guy, Futurama, these are more recent shows, and so they were more digitally, social media campaigns, email campaigns, et cetera, as the times changed. But the point is, the networks were all shocked that the ratings weren't really telling the whole story. There was this groundswell of popular support for these shows, and had they known about that, they probably never, originally they probably never would have canceled the shows. And of course, Arrested Development, cult hit. Futurama, same sort of thing, cult hit. But man, Family Guy and Star Trek, obviously, cultural. I would consider both to be cultural institutions in the U.S. So you think if those shows, had gotten canceled and never were brought back, be a big deal. So, and again, because we're in a webinar format, if we were live, this would be different, be a little more interactive. But I will just tell you what the most tweeted about show on television is. I'm sure you can take a minute to sort of venture a guess, yourselves. This was a shocker to me when we were doing our research. It's actually a show called Pretty Little Liars, based on the font that we used and the stock art of the actresses in the show. You can probably get a pretty good idea of what sort of demographic they're targeting, which is also part of the reason why I had no idea that the show even existed. And of course, the reason for the big so it's a show that is on ABC Family. It targets tweens, and the ratings, again, looking at just the Nielsen ratings, they're actually not that great, especially relative to a show like NCIS. But a tenth of the viewership is NCIS, so not atrocious, but certainly not a runaway success. But, and this gets back to the point of Nielsen starting to track Twitter, it's shows like this that forced Nielsen into looking beyond just the traditional metrics, the conventional wisdom, or the conventional KPIs, dare I say. And so the mid-season finale generated 70,000 tweets per minute. And according to Twitter's sort of trending, if you will, they dominated 50% of conversations about TV that evening. So that is a very, very powerful force, force to be reckoned with. And even if some of these people can't, vote, for example, or don't have a ton of purchasing power, they clearly have a lot of influence. So it's an example of, again, looking at being misled potentially by conventional wisdom. And taking it back to our industry, being I don't want to say misled necessarily, might be a little strong, but certainly looking at other metrics than what we would be used to. Right off the bat, PPC, for example, comes to mind. If you're looking at just impressions and click-throughs on the whole, and those aren't bad metrics, they're just telling only part of the story, right? And so you can be misled, or you can make critical decisions that might be based on incomplete information if you're just going by these sort of rolled up metrics, right? So our argument here is, and we always encourage dealers to do the same, it's to again, ask questions, peel back the onion, because this is you see the graphic here. It's might be a little confusing, but basically we're looking at a heat map of all of the cities in this case around the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And there's a blue pin. It's kind of hard to see in the middle. That's where this particular dealer is located. And you look at all the blue and yellow squares. Those are all sales, again, matched against the heat mapping, which is all PPC traffic. And so, again, if you look at a PPC report for your store, right, for your website, as a whole, you're not going to get geographic subtlety, which is just one way of slicing and dicing data. But it's the example that we're using here. So if you're looking at things on the whole, you could be missing a lot of subtlety, right? And in this case, for this dealer, they were spending a lot of money in Dallas and Irving, Texas, where there happened to be a competitor, one of the red pins over to the east there. and they were not generating any sales. So the conclusion was, well, let's tighten up our budget. Let's tighten up our our bids in the Dallas Irving area. Let's knowing the traffic patterns as well, which is of course so critical to a local market, knowing who is where and where people will drive. The dealer said, yeah, and of course the reason why we're not selling cars here, just a few used cars, is because nobody wants to drive, especially with a competitive dealership on brand right there. Nobody's going to drive across town, given the crappy traffic that exists in the area, just to buy a car from us when they can just go, especially on the new side, when they can go down the road. So the point is, when you start to look at data a little bit differently and look at different metrics, challenge the conventional wisdom, you start to get different insights, which could greatly influence your advertising decisions, your marketing decisions, your operational decisions, et cetera, et cetera. And we see the same thing with VDPs, for example. Not a bad metric, certainly gives you a lot of insight that you might not otherwise get, but can be misleading in the sense that a vehicle that's getting a lot of VDPs, but not a lot of conversions, that's a red flag. And if you're just looking at VDPs, of course, you might think this is the best thing since sliced bread, but it's like a lot of tire kickers with no actual, no action, nobody actually buying the car. So digging deeper is across every aspect of the business is something that is highly recommended. I believe this is the last section. I think I've gone through 3. Who's your competition? I'm losing count. Simple math too. This is not a good sign for someone who's talking about analytics. So let's talk about again. It's more competition, opportunity is perhaps even a better way to frame this concept of market share, et cetera, et cetera. So again, we deal with market share day in and day out. In this industry, of course, networks also deal with market share. Nielsen ratings, that's what they use. We use Polk reports, stuff that might come via Urban Science, directly or indirectly from your OEM, so on and so forth. And so we two different industries, but effectively the same metric, same benchmark, just different ways of getting the data. And the whole concept of market share, as it once stood, kind of like prime time, it's totally changing. It's on its head, right? It's no longer useful or even advisable just to look at one particular metric. And so networks have known their competition is changing. They need to evolve. Nielsen, of course, as we saw earlier in the presentation, knew the same thing. And so started looking at different data sets. And so if we take the example, same sort of keeping the visuals consistent here, same sort of a heat mapping, if you will, zip by zip, with competitive dealers in red pins, the dealer in question in blue pin. We're looking at some sample data to protect the innocent in this case. Totally different market, of course, than Texas. But the idea is that if we look at new sales, right? So again, conventional wisdom. This actually follows a pretty predictable pattern in the sense that this particular dealer, yes, they sell a lot of cars, but it's all within what you would expect radius-wise around their dealership, and a little bit down the coast there, near the Hudson. But effectively, it's nothing earth-shattering. There might be good zip-by-zip insights in terms of targeting, but ultimately, it's largely around what you would expect, largely. But then when you look at the used sales, this is, and of course, as we know, people will typically travel farther for a used car, less of a commodity product. This was mind-blowing to the dealer in question, because he had no idea he was selling. You look at down at the sort of the southeastern area. For those who know the New York, New Jersey area, this is into Queens, Brooklyn, sort of the western tip of Long Island, if you will. And all those yellow dots, those are all used car sales that, of course, looking at the roll-ups, he knew that he was selling these cars. They were, of course, coming out in the reports, but he had never looked at it on a zip-by-zip or geographic perspective. So looking at that brought this amazing insight that, oh my God, there's actually a massive market across the river. In fact, across 2 tunnels, 2 bridges, so to speak, into Queens, into Brooklyn. So huge opportunity there. And again, it's less around competition in this case, more around opportunity and being able to identify that. And getting back to our whole concept of knowing your customer, knowing what makes them tick, and then messaging, finding where more of them are, and then messaging to them appropriately. That's what it's all about. And so realizing that there's a potential opportunity here and trying to find similar situations, similar areas of opportunity is so key, because then it makes it easier to increase business, right? Again, fishing where the fish are. And a sort of another fun, neat little example here on a model level of why it's important to challenge conventional wisdom. And I've asked this question of several different groups of people in all different areas, all different geographies, and nobody has ever gotten the right answer. People have been close, but looking at demand data, online search activity, in terms of the top 3 Jeep Wrangler 4-door cross shops, I've gotten guesses from all over the place, right? And of course, you can probably tell by the fact that by the setup here, it's not exactly a straightforward answer. Ultimately, the #1 cross shop model is actually an F-150 and 2 sedans, being the number 2 and 3. So to me, when I found that out, that was actually an insight provided by our good friends at Dadium. Very, very mind-blowing, right? And at least for, certainly from my perspective, very surprising. So again, it's all about knowing your opportunity, knowing your, in this case, also your competition, right? Who are you really competing against from a model by model basis, right? It's not just who you think in terms of stocking those cars or even creating advertisements, conquest advertisements, et cetera, et cetera. You want to make sure you have all the data in hand to make maximum effectiveness of your advertising dollars, your budget. So that takes us to the last couple of slides, conclusion slide, then a wrap up of the 4 sections. So again, it's all about not necessarily even looking at data differently, although that's, as I mentioned in the presentation, very, very important. It's about making sure we're looking at the right data and using the tools, the applications, of course, the data sets at our disposal to be led a little bit less by gut and be led a little bit more by by insights that are data driven and are going to empower us to make again more effective usage of our precious budget, however big that might be, whether it's 10 grand or 100 grand. It's every dollar counts, and making maximum usage of it is so critical. And ultimately, again, when we know who our customers are, what they respond to from a messaging perspective, and of course where they are, that helps us frame our advertising strategy down to the model level, down to the zip code, even down to the household level, which is the ultimate goal, of course, getting that laser NSA style focusing, so we can have better measurement of our audience, we can have better evaluation of our success, and ultimately, of course, we can improve our performance. So quick recap, and then I'll hand it back over to Dina to take any questions. So section 1, what's your prime time? Of course, things have shifted dramatically. It's no longer so easy, but the power has shifted into the consumer's hands, both on the network side and on the dealer side. We had a little thought question here. Do you optimize campaigns based on time of day, based on mobile versus desktop? Who's your demographic? Simple question here. Do you do any demographic profiling? Is it all by, again, hey, I've shaken the hands of thousands of customers. I know my customers, and that's great. Nothing wrong with that. We're just saying that, again, digging into the data can give you better insight. So, doing a more formal demographic profiling, exercise can be very, very helpful. How do you measure what's truly working, i.e. what's your media mix, what data sets are you looking at? Remember, we talked about peeling back the onion a little bit, digging a little bit deeper rather than just on PPC, just looking at, for example, impressions or click-throughs, looking at zip by zip performance, campaign by campaign performance, again, mobile versus desktop, conversions alongside VDPs, not just VDPs alone, et cetera, et cetera. And then, who's your competition? And as I said, you can sort of flip it around. Where's your opportunity? Who do you or your salespeople look at as competition? How do you know they're your competition, right? It's because they've been down the road for 20 years, 30 years, or is it because, no, you've actually done an analysis and you know that actually that F-150 really is the #1 cross-shop model versus the Jeep Wrangler 4-door. So that is the proverbial wrap. Thank you very much for listening to my little speech here. And Dina, I will hand the proverbial microphone over to you so you can quarterback any questions.
Great. Thanks, Ken. Feel free to send through any questions you have, and we'll have Ken answer them. A couple have already come through so far. I just wanted to note that we actually have a more updated version of this presentation, and Ken may have a chance to pull it up here while we're waiting for questions, but I'll definitely make sure that you get um, access to those slides at the end of the presentation as well, because we have some more examples of specific dealerships that have been able to make decisions by looking at these types of data in concert. But Ken, one question we had was, what kind of demographic data is available to me as a dealer? I think they're looking for some more practical examples of what kind of data that they can get, and then how they might actually use it to target consumers along the lines of the zip code examples that you were giving earlier.
Yeah, so we work with, so we usually are eyeball deep in this sort of data on a daily basis, either ad hoc sort of consulting, as it were, or through our products. So from our experience, we've found that on the demand side, i.e. the what people are actually searching for, a company we're probably all familiar with, or mostly familiar with, Dadium. I had mentioned them during the presentation. They have what's called ASI scores, Automotive Shopper Intensity. These are, think of it as just a rolled up number that will tell you how many people or how often a particular model vehicle is being searched in your DMA. So that's really important. Obviously, there's a lot that goes into it. I won't go into the nitty-gritty details, but they can roll this up into a pretty tight metric. So that's one great starting point in terms of figuring out at the ground level, the tier 3 level, what people are searching for, which is important because when you know that demand data, that search data, well, now you can start to work proactively to stock the right cars, or if your hands are kind of tied, if it's new inventory, for example, to really laser focus your advertising, and even entice your spiff your salespeople differently, et cetera, et cetera. From an actual demographic or psychographic standpoint, we work a lot with Experian on that. Polk definitely has data in that regard in terms of their intenders. We don't work with Polk in that regard. We work with Polk on reg data, vehicle registration data, so I can only speak to Experian. They have, I always compare them to the non-governmental NSA. They have an incredible amount of demographic and psychographic data. So, Experian, of course, has an automotive division. So I know they work, again, at the tier 3 level. They definitely work at the OEM level, tier 1 level, but they certainly work at the tier 3 level. Being able to talk to those guys about, again, their sort of household by household level data, it's really interesting. Let's put it that way. When you start to, look at the data, like we saw in the BMW example, zip code by zip code, or model by model, so on and so forth. I mean, it's just amazing how much geographic or other differences can have on a recommended strategy or go to market. So hopefully that answers the question. But those are two key, plus Polk, which I couldn't speak to, but Experian and Dadium, two key data sets that we like to use. We think is are very very helpful, very effective in peeling back the onion.
Great. We had another question around how a dealer might use the cross-shop data that you referred to inform conquesting strategy. And Ken, I'm going to see if I can take the screen from you and get another example up here.
Sure. Let me see if I can actually. Oh, all right. There we go. You've wrenched it from my grasp. Okay, nice.
Can you see that slide there?
Not
No.
yet from my end. Definitely have the presentation. So in terms of cross-shop data, while we're waiting on, I'm not sure what you're going to show, Dina, but yeah, in terms of cross-shop data from an advertising perspective. So let's take the example of the Jeep Wrangler. Oh, there we go. We can see the screen now. The Jeep Wrangler versus the F-150, and Dadium will actually go so far as to using what they call bait cars in their strategy. So in other words, and I'll actually speak to that for a sec. I think it's a pretty neat technique. So knowing that, for example, someone who, and again, we're just going to use the example of the Jeep Wrangler 4-door with the F-150. Let's pretend that someone who is actually an F-150 purchaser, right, or converter, is enticed by a Jeep Wrangler 4-door. Having, a Jeep Wrangler 4-door, for example, used, even if you're a Ford dealership. Again, I'm not saying this is a specific example. I'm using this as a, to explain the bait car philosophy, or how to use that sort of cross-shot data. So don't quote me on this in terms of jumping to a going to auction and starting to buy up cars and putting them on your lot. But if people who search for Jeep Wrangler 4-doors used are ultimately going to buy an F-150, having a couple of used Wrangler 4-doors on your lot to entice people to effectively, either convert them to a new F-150, or have them convert themselves while they're on your site without, needing a salesperson's input. That's a very cool, very almost, again, NSA level strategy of attracting customers through a very unconventional means, right? You're not blasting them with, with a particular message, hey, buy the F-150. You're capturing the people who might otherwise not have responded to that sort of direct advertising or marketing, and instead are doing their organic searches, for example, for a bait car, so to speak, but then upsell themselves into a new F-150. Anyway, Dina, I'll let you talk through the slide before I run us out of time here.
Oh, I just wondered if you maybe wanted to walk through this example.
Oh, sure.
Yep. Here. Okay.
Yeah, sure. So this is actually a dealer in, I believe, the Portland area. So what's neat about the way they approached their advertising strategy, and this is a very granular strategy. In this case, we're talking about digital advertising. So they are selling a lot of cars, as you can see, by all the blue and yellow dots in their local market, but they're also ringed by competition. So they have to take a very strategic approach to how they approach their market, right? So they said, okay, well, we've identified opportunities where we are selling cars into certain zip codes, but we're not selling the lion's share of those particular cars, on brand in those zip codes. So therefore, there's opportunity, right? People are buying them. We're selling some. We're not selling all. So therefore, there's opportunity for us to go in. Looking at the demographic data, i.e., what are the characteristics of the people who are buying cars in these zip codes, right? We know that they're X-brand shoppers. We know that they're actually they're buying cars or registering those cars. But let's dig a little bit deeper. Let's focus on the particular type of customer that's in this zip code versus that zip code. They took a very focused approach, and in one of the zip codes, it's sort of farmland and foothills, they decided to market specifically, not shotgun approaches, specifically market a pickup versus one of the more urban areas where they said, okay, we're going to laser target our digital advertising. Again, in this case, same would hold in traditional, although of course it's a little more difficult to focus, to laser focus traditional, but they said they'd focus, in this case, compact hybrid, right? So something a little bit more tailored to the actual population. And so in this case, we're not conquesting, make versus make, brand versus brand. In this case, they're really trying to take a very, very laser-focused approach to market, to advertise, use their dollars effectively, and advertise the vehicles that they predict are going to be most successful in those particular areas, knowing the demographics, knowing the geography. So a very, very cool, I would almost call it, advertising 2.0 strategy.
Great. Well, if there aren't any other questions, we will complete the webinar. Thanks again for your time and attention today. As I mentioned, we will send out the recording and the slides later this afternoon, so you'll have access to them. And we'll also let everyone know who the winner of the consult with our Director of Analytics is. Thank you again for your time. We really appreciate it, and we hope you got a lot out of today's presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.